Siohan is here. After a long exotic journey from Kiev, Ukraine, he's just arrived today to London, and yeah, let's have a sit. Stéphan, really, thank you so much for such a beautiful, emotional film. It's one of my favorites, to be honest. And I know that you finished a rough cut of the film just before the full-scale invasion, and editing. It's happened to be almost 8 months after the February 24. Can you tell us, as a producer and maybe something from the director's side of Alisa, how your point of view on the film and the story changed?
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to convey a big hello from Alisa, the director of the film. She couldn't make it to London this weekend because she's just about to fly to Asia for the premiere of the film in Taiwan. She would have wanted to be here, but she delegated me, so to say. But I'm much more than a producer in this film. I mean, we are 3 co-producers. It's a Ukrainian, French, Polish co-production, but I'm French co-producer. You might have remarked my accent, but I live for now almost 10 years in Kiev. It's a place that I call home, and I was much more associated to the creative process of the film. Yeah, the film has been going on, the story has been going on since late 2019. This is when Alisa started to film the first images in Donbas, and she has been filming those kids over more than 2 years. And before the full-scale invasion in the winter 2021-2022, we had a rough cut of the film. I don't say that it was ready. There was still some work going on, but obviously everything changed after the 24th of February 2022. I was myself in eastern Ukraine, in Donbas, when the full-scale invasion started. Besides producing films, I'm also a reporter. I'm a correspondent for a French daily newspaper, Libération, in Ukraine, and I was covering I've been covering this war for 10 years, but I was covering what was going on in eastern Ukraine at that moment. And Alisa left the editing room at some point, and she wanted to shoot some additional scenes to the film. And on the 23rd of February 2022, she was on a train to eastern Ukraine to go to visit Andrei's family. You now know perfectly Andrei. She wanted to stay a few days there, and when the train arrived, the train station of Rubizhne in the Lugansk region was already massively shelled by the Russian forces. She had to hide between 2 walls just because the invasion had started. And she stayed a few days at Andrei's family, but she quickly understood that she couldn't film anymore, that the story was over, that a new reality was starting, and that this new reality was much bigger than cinema, and that this reality was crashing what she had done before, and that there was no point to continue this story. So her first priority was to try to take her characters out of there, the families too. You have to imagine that Andrei's house was located 300 meters away from the front line, 300 meters. So it was shelling almost every day for years. So when the invasion started, it became a pure hell over there. And the thing is that the parents of her characters didn't want to move first. It has been, people in Donbas have been used to this war for many, many years. And a lot of people say that nothing is too bad until one shell falls on your roof. And this is really, it was really the situation in Donbas. And so after a few days, she didn't manage to take them out. They eventually escaped after. I can tell it a little bit more. She then drove to Kharkiv, where Lisa was, so one of the characters. She was in a very bad situation. She was in a student's dorm, and the district was shelled. and she took out Lisa from the city of Kharkiv and brought her with friends to the Polish border. And after that, it was a few days after the start of the war, Alisa decided that it was pointless to continue doing cinema, and she went to a military unit and she became a soldier in a volunteer battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And from March 2022 until early August 2022, she has been fighting in a reconnaissance platoon of the Ukrainian Armed Forces in the north of Kharkiv. She then came back to civilian life and to cinema in August 2022. She was a volunteer in the army, not a staff soldier, and she had this possibility. And after lots of adventures, she understood that she has to finish this film. That there is a team behind, she has some responsibilities, there are some financiers also invested in the film. And she understood that she needed to bring this story out of this generation of kids in a place which now doesn't exist anymore. The film is made in two places, mainly Stanica Luganska and Zolote. There are surely some Ukrainians here. You know the places. These are two separate locations. Stanica was taken by the Russians in 24 hours after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and Zolote was a stronghold of the Ukrainian army and resisted quite long. The places of Zolote where Ruslan and Andrei live are now totally destroyed. And Alisa decided that she needed to bring this film to life, to tell the world about a world which will not exist anymore.
Thank you, Stéphan, and of course, thank you to Alisa for her bravery and her incredible talent. And we are lucky to have this film, the evidence, and it's a monument to these absolutely bright, beautiful teenagers. And I'm sure everyone who's seen this film just fell in love with their stories and with their absolutely open hearts. This film is warming, even if it's tragic in the end. It's more like reality tragic. And I would like to ask you a little bit more about the takes about these 5 teenagers. How you found it at the beginning, and I know you've been shooting 3 years, so I think you've built some especially strong connection.
So how the film started? In 2019, Alisa was contacted by a Ukrainian producer who wanted to make a sort of TV documentary about an old Ukrainian sportsman, Valentin Shabachov, who you see at the end of the film. He's a famous person in Ukraine. I mean, for the elder generation. He used to be a TV anchor in the 1990s, and he was, for example, commenting at the television the matches of the Ukrainian national team of football. So that's how he was famous. He was a sports journalist. He created the first children's sports TV channel in Ukraine. He was at some point a celebrity, and now is a bit elder. But he's also a bit famous in Ukraine as an adventurer. He's been traveling all his life during the Soviet times. After the Soviet times, he was going to Antarctica, crossing oceans, and his big passion in life was Himalayas. And he has made 48 expeditions in the Himalayas in his life. And during his 70s, he wanted to kind of bow up in style and make his last expedition, his 49th expedition, and bring with him to the mountains children from the war zone. And he made a call for children from the war zone. It was in 2019. He spread the message on local media, televisions, radio, small newspapers, local websites. He wanted to build up a team of teenagers who have spent all their life on the front, I mean half of their life on the front line since 2014, and to make a sort of therapy adventure to heal the trauma of being stuck in such a place, but also open their minds, because one of the tragedy of Donbas was that Donbas is the largest coal mining region in Europe. It's much bigger than Wales. It's like Wales, but even more stuck and close. And in 2014, 80% of the population had not stepped a foot outside Donbas. So the isolation is really, really important there. And a lot of kids, after the beginning of the war in 2014, those who had money actually left those places, and the poor people stayed there. And those kids have been living with a big feeling of isolation. And the aim of this trip was to be a sort of therapy, to discover the world outside, to see that there is something. Alisa got this proposal, but she didn't want to make a TV documentary or a portrait of this man. She met him eventually. But she quickly met the kids who, there was a selection process, and there were a few kids which were selected, and then less and less. And she understood that this adventure is not so much interesting, that what's interesting is the life of those kids. And she wanted to reverse the proposition and to make a film from the perspective of those children, not a film about this adventure. We were even not sure that they would go there, because imagine in 2019 it was before COVID, and then COVID came. You see nothing about COVID because no one wore a mask in Donbas. But I think in the film industry, no one believed in this project, because no one believed that in the middle of the COVID pandemic, some kids from a war zone will go to Nepal. It was just. So when the kids have been selected by this adventurer, Alisa totally focused on them, and it was a choice later on at the editing to totally avoid having him on the screen. It was a narrative choice, because she filmed a lot with him too. He also went to Donbas, but she decided to make a film about them. And what is amazing with those kids, Alisa has created a very, very strong bond with them. When she started filming them, they were between 14 and 16 years old. Andrei was the youngest. Alisa is now 35 years old, but she looks very young. And Alisa is also is a director who is coming from Eastern Ukraine. She's coming from a city called Zaporizhia, which is a big, not coal mining city, but industrial city in southeastern Ukraine. You all hear about Zaporizhia right now, because this is where the war is going on very heavily, and it's a steel engineering city. And Alisa's parents were working in steel factories, and she has this working class background, which is not much different from Donbas. And Alisa grew up in the 1990s in a quite poor environment, and I think that the kids recognized themselves in Alisa and vice versa, and she created a very specific bond with them. She was going to film all the time there, and sometimes she was staying 1 week without even using her camera, just living in the families, being accepted. And she created this closeness with them. And on the other side, what's very interesting with those kids is that I don't know how much you know about Donbas, except those from you who are from Ukraine, but a lot of people consider that it's a very gloomy place, that there has been war for 10 years now, coal mining place, derelicted, pro-Russian, lots of bandits everywhere. These are some cliches connected to Donbas. And we found there not a future bandits generation, but a generation of cool kids who wanted to break the circle, because Donbas, being the largest coal mining place in Europe, traditionally your grandfather was a coal miner, and then the son was a coal miner, and the grandson was a coal miner, and
you were next.
And as Ilya says, sometimes you become a policeman, and policemen sometimes are not better than bandits. And we found there maybe for the first time in the history of Donbas, a generation of children who wanted to break the circle and to discover the world outside. And this was the driving engine of the film.
That's amazing, and thank you for your story, and especially for the context you're giving to the film, because I understand for people who are not familiar with the Donbas and that region, some things can be very questionable, and I think it's very important to screen this film all over the world, and especially to give the context and the Cuban days. And I know you spend a lot of time in traveling with the film, and Alisa now is presenting this film very soon in Taiwan, as you told. But as she came back from the army, and does she work on the next project, and what is all about?
Since Alisa came back from her service, she firstly focused on finishing We Will Not Fade Away, which was eventually premiered at the Berlinale in January this year. It hasn't been an easy task to finish a film in Kiev last year. So our editing team was first editing in Kiev until the city was massively shelled, and we had power cuts. And making a film with computer hard drives without power, this is a challenge. So we had to move the team to Warsaw last autumn to finish the film. So it took us quite a lot of time. Since then, Alisa has been traveling with the film, showing it on different platforms. It was premiered in Liverpool in England last spring during the BBC Storyville festival organized during the Eurovision contest. Yes, she's working on 2 new projects. Alisa had promised to her close people that she wouldn't bring her camera to the front line when she went fighting. And because she's a tough cookie, she brought her camera with her, despite she had a 25 kilos backpack. And she filmed. And she filmed there. She didn't want to make a film, but she was in a unit which was really exposed in trenches, and she wanted to leave a testimony of these places, of these weird places in the middle of green areas in the forest, where actually they were fighting 300 meters away from the Russians. And she wanted to leave a testimony in case she dies, in case she doesn't come back, of these places, if someone finds her camera. And she made a sort of trenches diary. She filmed what was happening there, and she didn't want to make film first, but when she came back, she showed some rushes to a friend who said to her that there is a film. There is a film there. And she's right now preparing a film about the essence of this experience of going to the front line. It's going to be a film based on her experience, but also a dialogue with her son, who is 6 years old, to explain to him, maybe in 10, 15 years, why she decided to make this choice. So now she's working on this project, and she has another project. It's not that much a cinema documentary, but she's working with an international organization to document war crimes which have been committed in Russian occupied territories. As you know, the Ukrainian armed forces have taken back some territories since last year. This is an ongoing process, and the Ukrainian authorities and the international organizations find out terrible crimes in those places, which have been committed by the Russian occupiers. And in many places there are a lot of cases of sexual related violences, systematic. And right now Alisa is traveling quite often to southern Ukraine in places which were formerly occupied to talk with women who have been victims of sexual violences. And she wants to make an experimental film, not a classical TV NGO interviews talking heads documentary, but something more experimental about those violences.
That's absolutely astonishing, and we're so lucky to have Alisa and to be here able to continue her work. And probably we have questions from the audience. Please raise your hand.
Hello, my name is Olga Sidorushkina. I'm also working in Ukrainian Institute London. I'm a manager of English School for Displaced Ukrainians, and I'm displaced myself. I came here 2 months after the full-scale war started, and my first host family was a Ukrainian lady who came to London 20 years ago from Lugansk, but her mother, she was in Lugansk in 2014. And there is a story when she came here, she was deported back to Ukraine because UK said there is no war in Ukraine, there is anti-terrorist operation. So please go back to your country and your country has to protect you. Thank you so much for this film because it's really important to show these stories for the world to be aware. Before this film, I was watching 20 Days in Mariupol. I'm sorry, I'm very emotional right now. So in that film, it was said there was a hope if the world will see the footage of what is happening, they will start do something and help. From my observation, we still have a lot of Russians here in London. World still try to tolerate Russia. There are still good Russians. So my question, what else should we do or to show what is happening in Ukraine for decades of this war and hundreds of years, what Russia was doing to Ukraine, or what war crimes Russia has to commit for the world to wake up and to admit that Russia is a terrorist state, that there is no good Russians, because 75% of Russian people, it's like 100 million people, support this war. So what is your main message to the world? Thank you.
I don't have a simple answer to the question of Russians or good Russians. Actually, I mean, I'm living here for 10 years, and again, this is a place called home, and I have, I mean, my son was born in Ukraine, and he's Ukrainian, so I feel part of this community. Not technically, but in my heart. I would love to show this film to Russians, actually.
Please do.
And on the person, I would love to be in festivals, and there will be a Russian seating. I've been in Russia many times. 15 years ago, the last time I went to Russia was 5 or 6 years ago. Actually, we showed Alisa's previous film, Home Games, in a festival on the island of Sakhalin, in the Pacific Ocean. We got the confirmation that the organizers of this festival were absolutely great people. And Alisa couldn't go to Russia. She didn't want to go to Russia. It was dangerous for her to go to Russia for different reasons. But as a French producer, I decided to go there. And it was not a political film. It was a film about female football. But I was in a cinema full of Russians who were asking me questions about Ukraine. And it was a pleasure, a guilty pleasure, to answer to Russians in Far East Russia about the reality of this place, which is not a fascist country. It was a guilty pleasure for me. And I think that cinema is a tool, and I understand that Ukrainian filmmakers are not able right now to engage this discussion. This is not the time for this. But at some point we will need to show to good Russians this reality too, and we will need to give them a wake-up call so that they can start to act, because they are very passive. What is the message we want to bring with this film? We want to show our Donbas. It's a place that I know for 10 years. I've been covering the war there. I've been on the day one of the war in a city called Slavyansk in April 2014. It's a place which has been demonized. It's a place which Ukrainians didn't like much, and maybe still didn't like too much, because a lot of people are dying there. It's a place where people spoke mainly Russian. It's a place where there was a lot of nostalgia to the Soviet Union. It's not an easy place. It was a place full of pro-Russian politicians and gangsters. It was a place where identities were totally mixed. But you know, Donbas is not a Russophone, pro-Russian, separatist place as it has been depicted in the European media during years. It's much more complex. I would say that in this place, in this huge post-industrial steppe, grandparents were nostalgic about the Soviet Union, about a sense of stability which will never come back because it has been condemned by history. And the generation of the parents had lost their sense of identity and didn't know much if they were Ukrainian or Russian, and sometimes they just rather say that we are locals, we are from Donbas. And in 2014, in this place where a lot of people had mixed identities and were mainly watching Russian televisions and using Russian cultural products, the Russian Spring launched by Putin just spread like wildfire. And this is why everything started. But the kids were totally different. I don't say that all the children in this part were pro-Ukrainian, it would be lying. But we had a generation of kids, 15, 20 years old, who have gone to school all their life in Ukrainian language, who don't watch televisions because, I mean, who in Donbas, who is 15 now in Ukrainian is watching television? Everyone is on Instagram or on TikTok. So on TikTok or Instagram, they are not faced to Russian propaganda like their grandparents. The kids here, whom you have seen, are totally Ukrainian. This was a new Ukrainian generation, and Donbas was changing maybe 20 years after Ukraine. Ukraine has made this transition 10, 15 years before. In the 1990s, it was also, all of Ukraine was post-Soviet. And just Donbas stayed behind. And Donbas was making this transition despite this ongoing war. And so the message we want to bring to the world is that there was some sun there was some happiness, and kids were growing up happy. And all those places have been burned down, totally burned down. You just cannot imagine how some places are looking like. After that, I will leave another question, but and I will also keep a moment to give you some news about the characters, because we have. I mean, I know for the ones who are not in Donbas, I know where they are and what they're doing, but I can also tell one or two words about Ilya and Ruslan. But there is one boy, Grisha, the cadet of the army, the brother of Lisa, whom you see during the Christmas scene. Grisha stayed 9 months under Russian occupation. He was a 16 years old cadet of the Ukrainian army, and he was hiding in the house of his parents so that the Russians didn't find him. On the 30th of December last year, he escaped alone through Russia. He crossed Russia, 10 checkpoints, he crossed the Ukrainian border. He arrived at our place in Kiev on the 30th of December last year, after 9 months of occupation. He's now in Belgium with his sister. And he's 17 now. He's going to the school of the Belgian Marine, Civil Marine. And when he saw the film for the first time in Berlin, he took the microphone and said in Russian in front of 900 people, this film, he said to me, after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, our life became like a burned field. Everything was gray, smelled like ashes, and we had lost the feeling of our life before. And he said that this film is a window to our previous life, a life that will just never be again, that we will not be able to bring back. And this is what we want to show.
Thank you, and it's definitely, your film is giving this love and a bright light. One more question, please. Yes.
Hi, thanks very much. How did you meet Alisa? What's your story? Are you still working with her? I'd like to know also what the challenge was to put together the story. Did you have an idea of what it would be? And what about the funders? Was that difficult to work with?
So how I met Alisa? She's my wife. No, I know Alisa for 10 years. I knew her from even the time before I moved to Ukraine. And after I moved to Ukraine, she eventually became my partner. And this is the second film we do together. So obviously, I mean, it's not only a business creative relationship, we are a family. I was struggling with the question, so give me the second part of the question, please, again.
What was the challenge of finding the story? I mean, were the scenes put together on purpose? Did you sort of reconstruct moments, or was it just a lot of footage and you put the story together in the edit?
It's just a lot of footage. This is pure observational documentary. There is nothing fictionalized. Alisa is a hardcore observational documentary filmmaker. There is a trend in contemporary documentary to reenact some scenes. I'm not a fan of this because, of course, there can be some hybrid documentaries, but I think that documentary should stay a language of verite, and I don't like much when there is reenactment. In that case, I don't remember how many hours of shooting Alisa had on her hard drives, but she spent weeks and weeks and weeks, and she had gigabytes of rushes. And so there is nothing set. She didn't ask to, it's absolutely not her methodology to ask to the protagonist to do this or to do this. Her methodology is to go to a place with her camera and to make herself accepted by the people who are there without filming most of the time, so that at some point she becomes invisible, like a furniture, and they don't pay too much attention on what's going on. And so yeah, I mean, the film has been done on at the editing table. Nothing was scripted.
Stéphan, I know We Will Not Fade Away was few days in BBC iPlayer. If there is any chances to see this film on streaming here in UK or somewhere in Europe?
We hope so. Yeah, after the BBC Storyville Festival in May, if I'm not mistaken, the film was put 1 week on BBC iPlayer. I think it was quite successful. I mean, that's what the people from BBC told us. And we hope that the film will be commissioned by the BBC and shown on BBC Storyville probably in 2024. The film will be shown for the first time on TV on Arte in France and Germany early 2024. We have an agreement. The film has been selected for the European Film Awards, which are going to take place in December, and we have an agreement with Arte that they're going to broadcast the film a little bit later. And in the UK, yeah, we hope that the film will be shown on BBC. I mean, it's not a deal yet, but I hope so.
Yes, and I believe everyone is going to be an ambassadors of this film. Please, one more last question from the audience.
Hi, Stephan. My name is Oleg, and I'm originally from Kharkiv. So thank you and to all the creative team to giving a picture about Donbas that not only foreigners but also many Ukrainians did know a lot about prior to the first invasion and then the full-scale invasion. My question is about the connection between those people who keep living in the occupied territories and those who have escaped or left, like the two girls who are now in Belgium and France respectively. Are they still in touch with their relatives and parents who are under occupation? And if so, given their different experiences now, how do they manage to maintain this communication despite that they are very far apart now? Thanks.
So this is a moment when I can give you some news of the characters. I'm going to start with the kids who managed to escape. So Andrei, our rock star, is actually what happened is that his family escaped Zolote in the Lugansk region in April 2022. actually when the Russians were about to take the place, so in very, very last minute. And the family relocated to the Dnipro region in central eastern Ukraine. And his father, who is also a coal miner, found a job in a mine in Pavlograd, for those who know. So Andrei is living there with his mother, with his father. And in the past month, he didn't know what to do after school. And a few days ago, he finally entered not Kiev Polytechnic Institute, but Dnipro Polytechnic Institute. So he's now a young student in Dnipro. He became 18. He lost all his motorbikes, but during the summer he found a new one. He gathered some money to buy a new one, so he's still driving. He sent me a photo with on the motorbike with his new girlfriend. So everything is, it's going well. Lera has stayed 6 months under Russian occupation in Stanica Luganska. We had a plan to make her escape, but she was not 18, and she's an orphan. The family you see here is it's a family type or orphanage from the Lugansk region, and she wanted to escape, but her foster family didn't want to let her go. And in September last year, exactly 1 year ago, she became 18, and she went to the foster mother to take her passport, and she left. And she left through Russia alone, and she ended up in France, in the south of France, and she's been living there since then. She's in a family, in a village, and she's learning French, and now she wants to become a French teacher. She, until a few weeks ago, she wanted to at some point go back to Ukraine and teach French when she will be ready. But now she has a new boyfriend who lives in Marseille, so I think that she's maybe lost for Ukraine. And Lisa is living in Belgium. She's in a very renowned art school, and we're in touch very often with her. She's the best student in her generation. She's a queen. She speaks perfectly English. She's drawing. She's painting. We see them. Not often, but we try to bring them to festivals when we have the opportunity. So they were with us in Berlin, and we brought them to Prague, to Warsaw. We have a very, very strong connection with them. I talked about Grisha, the little cadet of the army, so he escaped. His story is absolutely amazing. And now he's living in Belgium, and he's gonna go to school in Ostend, on the Belgian coast, to learn sailing. He's living with his sister. So the two other ones, Ruslan and Ilya. When we finished the film, we had absolutely no idea if they were dead or alive. Not everything is clear now. Alisa got a call from Ilya just before New Year's Eve last year. He called on Telegram, so he's alive. He's still living at his grandmother's place, and he's hiding. I cannot tell much more, but he's in a very bad situation because he's over 18 now, and he wants to escape. He wants to come to Ukraine, but if he moves 1 inch, he can get arrested at the first checkpoint. And what the Russians do, they are bringing kids to the local militia, basically in the ranks of separatist units, to go to fight against Ukraine. They give them a uniform, a rusty gun, and they are just sent as meat fodder. So he's just staying there, and he cannot move. And since the 31st of December last year, we now have no news. We don't know what happened, and he has deleted all social media accounts. So we don't know. Ruslan, we tried to contact him. We know that the place where he was living has been massively bombed, almost destroyed. We know that he has been staying during a few weeks in a basement with his family. We have absolutely no news. He didn't give a life sign until we found out this summer that some people have seen him in the city of Lugansk, which is the second big city of Donbas after Donetsk. And it seems that he was there during a few months, but we have absolutely no idea what he's doing, what has happened to the family. I mean, we just know that someone has seen him alive there. So these are the only news that we have, and we are still waiting for them to contact us whenever they will have the opportunity. But of course, it can be also very dangerous for them.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for such a beautiful film. Let's hope for better for Ruslan and Ilya and trust in Ukrainian armed forces. Thank you everyone for being with us these 4 days during Ukrainian Film Festival. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you.